The problem seems to be with unresolved issues. They can be resolved, at least often, by NVC methods, nonviolent communication. But some are not. And it's how to handle those that are not that then still presents as a problem. For instance, in a divorce situation where one party didn't want to get divorced and feels very harmed by the breakup, negotiations concerning children may move to preferred situations in that divorce situation, but the divorce situation is still a grief to the one that didn't want to. And the question is, so to speak, how best do we cope with this situation given we can't solve the divorce? The aggrieved party may well suffer from resentment and at the least is not going to be happy because they're aggrieved. So quite simply, how should the aggrievement be removed? How can it be removed? Well, in some sense what we're saying is it's going to be forgiven if it's not going to be repaid and the couple come together again. And even then there'd need to be forgiveness. And by forgiveness, I think I mean not holding the person as they now are, as being in some sense in debt for any costs they may have previously caused. And that's not likely to really happen unless the aggrieved party is now very happy with the current situation that they are in, either because the person has changed back to, say, the marriage situation with them, or because they are happy because of some other change, for instance, finding a new partner that's very satisfactory indeed. In which case the costs of the past become less and less important. Quite simply, if you see yourself as the cause of the dilemma that your partner is in, you either hope that they will find a better substitute for you, or you'll return to them and their forgiveness. Of course, you may not blame yourself for leaving, and therefore see their forgiveness as rather inappropriate. The reality is that changes have occurred in the past that possibly both feel the other is responsible for, except to the extent you come to the conclusion that it was not the other party's fault, that they did whatever they did that caused you to feel bad. The reality is that we do things to others that will cause others to have adverse feelings, and that they won't suffer those problems if we don't do those things. It is also clear that there are some things we do have to do. We may feel there are legal requirements, and you could say that's just a feeling, but it's very important. In our societies, that you do feel accordingly. It's not that feelings are not valid. On the contrary, it's their validity that causes your opponent, when they understand that these are your feelings, to have some sort of empathy for you. With you. In that they know what that sort of feeling is like themselves. And they don't want it, other things being equal, for anybody. I mean, in other words, what one really wants is one's own feelings to be catered for. It's not that we want other people's feelings to be hurt. If you do come across that sort of individual, you should avoid them like the plague. They are dangerous. It's a bit like in economics. We assume that people are self-centered, yes, but not vindictive, jealous, or gain positive utility from other people's unhappiness. In other words, the more other people's disutility. In other words, we don't assume that there are people who get more and more pleasure out of knowing that you are more and more unhappy. That's a sort of sadism. Now, the reality is that there are people like that who act in that way at times in our society, and you must be on guard against them. And sometimes the nicest of people can drop into that sort of behaviour to whatever degree they do. Quite simply, they want revenge. Hopefully only for a moment or for a transitory period. But whilst they are in that state, you are at risk. The more they hear you are suffering, the more you tell them how you felt sad, you felt that your needs weren't being met. Oh, they're just over the moon. This is good news. My mother expressed times when she could delight in anything bad that happened to my dad. To hear that he was having a nightmare was a joy. There's me going up the stairs even so, saying, "Are you all right, Dad?" Oh, yes, boy. Yes, fine. Thank you. But for a moment at least, and possibly for a long time, she was in bitterness. And remained that way for at least 20 years after his death, as far as I know, to her own death. Now, I don't mean that Mum was necessarily a menace to everyone else, but she was certainly a menace to him. And I also don't mean she was entirely responsible. In fact, I'm not even sure she was responsible at all, but I am clear she was like it. And my dad should have put as much distance between himself and her as he could have done, given he was well off, still met what he felt was his obligations, even keeping her and me, probably with her, of course, and quite honestly found someone else. He didn't do that, which made a continuing tragedy for all of us. I don't mean he was to blame for not doing it. He kept to what he thought was right, because he felt, I think, if you'd really analysed it, that this was the true needs, whether other parties thought it so or not. Well, this is just to say, and I think NVC recognises this, that you shouldn't negotiate with the person, with the wild dog. The female bear needs to eat you and have you eaten by her cubs. If you can't negotiate by throwing her a lot of immediate food and immediately, you should escape from her presence as fast as you can. Or perhaps you have the opportunity to defend yourself. And this is the very essence of the problem of war, isn't it? A subjected nation gets pushed further and further. At some point it feels the subjection is possibly worse than out-and-out war. And then schemes to, in some miraculous way, defeat the enemy by violence. Is that ever rational? Well, the jury is still out on that. And perhaps it depends on the probability of you winning or losing the war and what situation that's going to leave you in afterwards. And besides, rationality goes out the window if the subjected party is so incensed with the injustice that revenge is on the menu. Then need, anger and revenge conspire together for violence, and the outcome is whatever it is, and what seems to be much to do with chance, the unpredictable. NVC then is confined to the feasible. Can we make situations better? Will empathy bring some encouragement to agreement on the issues being presented, where both parties leave happier than they were before? Not necessarily in ecstasy about the other person, of course, for all sorts of other reasons. There are problems with MVC. I mean, obvious ones, like your audience will tell you, no, I am unhappy because of him. It's not that I'm making myself unhappy. He caused a situation which is making me unhappy. Now, you can erode this from the point of view of saying, well, he was not the cause. And I don't mean that you were instead, but that, he was under certain pressures that pressed him to do certain things. And we do have to challenge the statement that it's always wrong to say, I had to do it. I can say that I chose to kill you because I thought otherwise you would have killed my children. In that sense, I chose to do it and had to do it to avoid a catastrophe. This still seems to me rational language. And even rational behaviour. That's probably because I'm not for blanket rule of non-violence, but for simply choosing the best outcome, albeit trying to take into account the uncertainty of such. You might say discounting it accordingly, with the uncertainty involved. It seems to be rational to me, both logically consistent and being what is in some sense ideally wanted, which is however the defined is. And that's according to one's needs, which may well have been denied by what the situation will be otherwise. The problem simply seems to be that the calamity I'm suffering from seems not to be of my own mistake, but of you satisfying your needs despite the fact it clashed with mine. I can empathise with your needs, but I'm going to do all I can to at least achieve some egalitarian distribution of what is felt to be a fair situation, unless I'm only so self-centered as to have no empathy with your situation at all. In the margins we can move towards creating a situation of improved empathy between the parties, and therefore at least some modification to their behaviour. But the imbalance of needs being met, at the least, will still be the elephant in the cupboard. It can be big and able to break out at any time.